Hello, my name is Matthew, and I read Swann In Love by Marcel Proust. I found this edition, it's Oxford Classics, at a used bookstore a few weeks ago, and I was really interested in it for a few reasons. It's a new translation. I've read the Moncrief translation and also the Lydia Davis translation, and for writers that I love that write in a different language, there's a fascination in finding different translations and seeing um, how the treatment differs. And uh, this is a new translation by Brian Nelson, which I've never heard of before. And also, Oxford World Classics made an interesting editorial decision to publish a single chapter, a novella length chapter from In Search of Lost Time or Remembrance of Things Past as a standalone volume. So, in the first volume of In Search of Lost Time, Swann's Way, we get this section. And so they excised it out and published that on its own. And I just thought that was fascinating and made me really interested in reading it. Proust is one of those writers that um, you hear a lot about. He's considered one of the great French writers of the 20th century, and he's a writer that I really enjoy. And when it comes up in conversation, sometimes uh, someone might ask, well, where do you start? This is a writer that you really like. What would you recommend as the first thing I start reading? And it's tough. Proust wrote one great big book. There's multiple volumes, but they're fairly sizable each on their own. So it's all you can really say is we'll start with Swann's Way and see if you like it. If you like it, you're in luck. There's a second volume and third volume. Um, if you don't like it, Swann's Way is a pretty representative sampling of the whole. But this, I thought was so exciting, and I just finished this a few days ago. Really enjoyed it. Um, I was wondering how well of an introduction, as far as dipping your toe into Proust, this would come off as. I was thinking about that as I was reading it, and I've read this a few times, but um, always in context of the whole, the full volume of Swann's Way, and it is a different reading experience. I've always found Proust to be a very funny writer, or can be a very funny writer. Nelson's translation of Swann In Love I found effective, but extremely amusing. I was giggling throughout the whole book in the way that readers can silently laugh. You laughing with your eyes. And uh, it begins with that ridiculousness and pompousness of being a part of society. And so this is early 20th century French society where you have salons, you welcome people into your home, and you go to other parties, and there's these circles, and all these different people are running in circles, and you want to keep your reputation and your standing, and you're always making sure that you're not having any gaffes or having your name marred. And reputation is a really big deal in these French societies. It begins with, I don't know if I have, to belong to the little set, the little circle, the little clan of Verduins. That's the family name. One condition was sufficient but necessary. tacit adherence to a credo, one of whose articles was that the young pianist was uh, Madame Vedurin's protege that year, and of whom she would say it shouldn't be allowed to play Wagner as well as that. I didn't read that very well, but the point is, the most trivial uh, events, the smallest deviation in opinion, can have you exiled from society. And so in these circles, everybody has to agree with one another. And if you're in somebody's salon, you have to love Wagner if everybody loves Wagner, or you have to love a certain performance of Wagner, and you have to be very careful with how you gauge your enthusiasm. The smallest deviation, and you can be just have someone give you an eyebrow, and then you're blackballed from society. And Proust is so exacting and perceptive in how body language and those little nuanced slights of conversation, minor differences in tone, can change a dinner party, how somebody is seen. And because of that, the first circle of friends that we find in this book, the Verdurins, I can't say French words, they all speak with cliches, stock phrases, and they get together and kind of mechanically go through the motions of lively conversation while everyone's fearful of going off and having some minor opinion that could be frowned upon. And so we have our two main characters. We're going to have Odette, who's the love interest and part of this circle, and then Monsieur Swann, Charles Swann, who is invited into this circle. And Charles Swann has his own reputation and good standing outside of these little circles. He knows people in high places and is already doing very well for himself, but he finds an interest in these circles, and when he meets Odette, he becomes infatuated. And all of these characters are unlikable. The novel is going to have a kind of romance running through it between Swann and Odette. But you're not going to read it and sympathize with either one of them. They shouldn't be together. The fascination is the exactitude, and it's not so much perceptiveness, it's obsessiveness. The way that Proust can have these characters obsessing over every minor detail. And Proust has that way of luxuriating through sentences or thoughts that really amplify that feeling of nitpicking, just seeing everything and obsessing over every minor detail. And at first, Swann is going to these dinner parties to see Odette, but he wants to show up late at night after he's seen his other mistress. And he goes to these parties, and Odette will be there, and she'll be happy to see him. And they start having their tryst. They're getting along, and they'll spend their time that they want to together, and then Swann gets to leave. Well, there's one night, Swann is out later than expected. And by the time he gets to the party, Odette is already gone. And he goes, well, where'd she go? And they say, well, she went out to a restaurant. And now this person who has had this sort of casual Swann, this casual confidence, very comfortable that he'll show up at a determined time. She'll always be there, and he'll be able to enjoy his time with her, while he's also able to have time with his mistress. Now he shows up and she's not there, and it drives him mad. He starts running around Paris looking for which restaurant she's in. And the night's getting later and later. He has his carriage driver. His carriage driver is saying it's a lost cause. It's whatever time, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. And he finally bumps into Odette. But now it's way too late for any sort of reasonable excuse as to why they're meeting. And he has to just come up with some lie as to why he's just kind of bumped into her. And as it goes along, the perception that they have of each other really goes up and down, whether they love each other or hate each other, whether they find each other beautiful or can't stand the sight of their faces. Revelations like Charles Swann at first was very pleased that he didn't have to bother with Odette all day. He could just show up at night, and there she'll be, and they can have their time together. Then finally he comes to this realization. He has this moment where he goes, well, how like, what is she doing all day that she's not worried about me? And then now he's obsessing over the rest of her life. And they're both living lives outside of whatever sort of relationship that they're having. And it's obsessive and unhealthy. It's a character driving himself mad with jealousy, and going through a whole range of unpleasant emotions. Something that you hear quite often about Proust are those kind of long, winding sentences that can just kind of go on forever. You're not going to find that much in this volume, but you do have thoughts, something that should be rather minor, that is just picked over for whole passages. I did want to I'll give you an example of how he can just obsess over certain details to the point where it squeezes out humor. And I'll just read this. The Marquis de Forestel's monocle was minute and rimless, and, as it required a constant, painful clenching of the eye, in which it was encrusted like a superfluous piece of cartilage, whose presence was inexplicable and its composition very rare, gave his face an expression of melancholy refinement, and made women imagine that he was capable of suffering greatly in love. So it's just a passage of somebody having a monocle in their eye. Now, as far as, is this a good introduction into the whole of Proust's larger work, Swann's Way, or Remembrance of Things Past? And something that's almost completely missing is that In Search of Lost Time is a first-person narrative. We have a narrator that's interchangeably Marcel Proust, telling the story of his life and the events in his life, and how he's grown up, and childhood memories, and all of those things. This reads like a third-person narrative, and there's only a few times you get clues that this whole thing that you're reading is a story that one person is either thinking about or telling you about. My uncle advised Swann not to see Odette for a little while. My uncle. And it kind of comes out of nowhere. Um, it makes sense as the whole of the work, but you do miss that. And I was thinking about uh, how this relates to the whole of the work, and it would be as if you watch a single episode of Seinfeld, uh, the puffy shirt episode, or the contest, or just a really great episode of Seinfeld, and you watch it. And I remember watching television with my dad when I was a kid, and my dad sometimes had a remark if we were watching Seinfeld or something. He would go, "Who thinks of this stuff?" And I remember just thinking about that because at a certain point, the answer is obvious. A writer. A writer thought of the plot of a Seinfeld episode. The whole of the work, In Search of Lost Time, compared to Swann's Way, would be watching a Seinfeld episode and then discovering Larry David, and a whole world opens up. You realize that the obsessiveness that you read in this book, the nitpicking, the just obsessing over every little detail and being aware, this constant awareness of what everyone around you is doing and whether it's the correct thing to do or the wrong thing to do, is very, very similar to watching Seinfeld and enjoying it, and then learning about Larry David and watching Curb Your Enthusiasm. And a lot more things start making sense. This is a story that a very neurotic, peculiar, obsessive narrator is telling you. And I would absolutely recommend this as a great start to starting to get a sense of reading Proust. And it's a breeze. It's maybe 150 pages, 180 pages. And I really enjoyed this. I thought it was an interesting exercise. I thought the translation was great. I found it quite humorous. Let me know if you've read this translation or anything else by Proust or any other translations. Leave a comment if you would like. Thank you for watching and take care.